Dust churned beneath Sergeant Kalen Dorn's boots as he trudged through the dead valley, the sun-baked horizon rippling in distorted heat. This was EOS 4, a failed colony, half melted by orbital strikes and half forgotten by the factions that once fought over it. Wind carried the sour tang of scorched alloy and ozone, mingled with the coppery scent of rusted blood. The war had moved on. What was left behind didn't matter. Not to the unified Terran command, not to the Jathari Imperium. Only scavengers haunted this place now. Kalen wasn't scavenging, though. He told himself that every time his boots sank into the reddish sand, he was gathering data, salvaging black box cores, weapons caches, anything that might help get Earth's name off the surrender treaties. But deep down, he knew he was looking for something to justify staying alive. His HUD pinged a weak energy signature up ahead. Kalen squinted toward the signal's origin, a half-buried structure, probably Jathari. Their architecture was unmistakable, sinuous curves of synthetic bone, latticed with pulsing blue veins of dormant power conduits. He approached cautiously, weapon raised. The war might have ended, but EOS 4 hadn't heard the news. The signature grew stronger, closer, not mechanical, organic. His grip tightened on the pulse rifle. Inside the broken husk of the alien building, silence reigned. Light filtered through a jagged crack in the ceiling, catching motes of dust. Then he heard it, a low, rasping breath, not the growl of a predator. It sounded strained, pained. He rounded a column and froze. A massive creature lay crumpled near the back wall, gray formatted with dried blood. A Jathari bioengineered war beast. They called them Varric. Wolves, twisted by genetic mastery into monsters of war. This one was bigger than any he'd ever seen, easily 5 meters long from nose to tail, its muscular frame trembling with each breath. Piercing amber eyes locked onto his. And beside her, 2 smaller forms, cubs. One lay still, belly rising and falling in shallow rhythm. The other whimpered, nestling close to the mother's heaving flank. Kalen's mind screamed to back away. These things had ripped through platoons. He'd seen them leap over barricades, tear through armor. But she wasn't attacking. Her eyes didn't hold rage. They held exhaustion. He kept the rifle trained, but didn't move. Easy, he murmured, more to himself than to her. The Varric bared her teeth weakly, a flash of yellowed fawn. Her ears flattened, but she didn't rise. Couldn't. Shrapnel glinted from her side. Half-melted alien metal fused into muscle. One leg dragged unnaturally, bent at a sick angle. And the cubs, he saw now. One was bleeding from the mouth. Internal trauma. It wouldn't last a night. What the hell were they doing here? He looked around. The facility was a fallback shelter. Emergency rations stacked in an open crate, a scorched comm station blinking weakly. It had been used recently. Someone had been here. Jathari. Likely evac forces. And they'd left these creatures behind. Left them to die. Kalen took a slow step forward. The Varric snarled softly. He paused, lowered his weapon slightly. I'm not here to finish what they started. No response. Of course not. She was a beast. Even if the Jathari claimed their war creatures had higher reasoning, they were still tools. Weapons. But something in her gaze unsettled him. It wasn't fear. It was resignation. He holstered his rifle. She didn't move. Kalen crouched, fingers brushing the ground for stability. The cub closest to him stirred, tiny paws twitching. Its fur was soft, pale silver, unmarred. No armor plating like the full-grown Varric. No scars. It blinked up at him, eyes an uncanny match to its mother's. Intelligent. Curious. He exhaled. Damn me for a fool. From his pack, he pulled out a medfoam injector. It was meant for humans, but the Jathari physiology wasn't entirely alien. The compound might help. He edged forward, one cautious motion at a time, until he was close enough to reach the wounded cub. The mother's eyes tracked his every movement. A deep rumble built in her throat. I'm trying to help. She didn't stop him. Didn't move. Her muscles were coiled, but still. Trust. Or too weak to fight. He injected the foam into the cub's side. The tiny body flinched, then went still again, breath deepening slightly. Relief washed through him, unexpected and unwelcome. He wasn't here to play nursemaid to monsters. And yet, Kalen sat back on his heels. The cub nestled closer to its mother, limbs twitching less violently now. The second cub remained curled, uninjured but unmoving. It hadn't even looked up at him. "What happened to you?" he asked the adult, knowing she wouldn't answer. "Your masters didn't think you were worth saving." The Varric blinked slowly. A strange noise emerged, barely a growl, more like a sigh. Kalen leaned against a cracked console, suddenly exhausted. He should have left. Walked away. Radioed in the location so the brass could deal with it. But those cubs. Not killing machines yet. Just pups. And the mother. The Jathari bred their war beasts for savagery, yes. But also for loyalty. He remembered the briefings. They are loyal beyond reason. They do not abandon unless commanded. So why had the Jathari abandoned them? The question lingered like smoke. The sky outside shifted. Clouds gathering. Dust storm coming. Kalen stood and sealed the entryway with a collapsed door slab, locking in what warmth the structure had left. He activated a low-heat emergency lamp, casting golden light across the chamber. The mother watched him still, not with hostility. Something else. Understanding. He set down a ration bar, broke it in half, and laid a piece near her. She didn't move, didn't eat, but her eyes softened. "Storm's coming," he said, voice softer now. "I'll stay until it passes. Just the night." No reply. Kalen sat again, removing his helmet. Sweat cooled on his forehead. He watched the cubs breathe. The wounded one stirred again, and he allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction. Just the night. The wind outside howled louder, a banshee scream across the sands. The structure groaned under the pressure, but it held. Inside, strange peace settled over them. He didn't know what tomorrow held. Didn't know if he'd made a mistake. But for now, the line between enemy and protector blurred. The giant wolf laid her head down, eyes never leaving him. And Kalen, for the first time in years, didn't feel alone. Morning came not with light, but with a shift in the wind, a silence where howling had been, the storm finally exhausted. Kalen opened his eyes to a quiet stillness inside the crumbled structure. He was cold, body stiff from sleeping against broken metal, but still alive. That in itself was a small miracle. The Varric had not killed him in the night. That was another. He sat up slowly, gaze drifting toward the mother and her cubs. The adult wolf hadn't moved much, though her breathing was more regular now. Dried blood still crusted her side, and the shrapnel remained embedded. The wound festered. Infection was setting in. The cubs slept against her flank, one curled like a silver knot, the other, smaller, sickly, still trembled in its sleep. Kalen rubbed at his eyes, pulled on his helmet to check atmospheric readings. The storm had cleared, but the temperature outside was dropping again. The fractured ecosystem of Eos 4 was nothing if not unpredictable. With his gear powered down most of the night, the reserves had dwindled. He needed to find a solar array soon to recharge. But first, he walked to the ration pack and took out another med foam injector. Only 2 left. One he'd need for himself, if the radiation exposure from the storm reached dangerous levels. He hesitated, then crossed the chamber and knelt near the mother. "I have to get that metal out," he murmured. She didn't respond, just shifted slightly, a wince rippling through her muscles. He took the silence as permission. Kalen rolled back his sleeve and activated his wrist light, angling it toward the embedded shard. It was alien alloy, sharp, curved, likely from the comms tower outside, fused with flesh and muscle. Removing it would hurt like hell. He set his jaw, grabbed his field knife, and slid the flat edge beneath the shard. The Varric stiffened. "I know. Hold on." She didn't roar, didn't lash out. Her jaws opened slightly, breath escaping in pained bursts, but she held still as he worked the blade. Blood welled up, thick and dark. He pressed gauze against it, sprayed the last of the foam, and taped the wound. Crude medicine, but it was all he had. When he pulled away, her body slackened. She exhaled once, long and slow, and lowered her head again. That night, Kalen didn't sleep. He stayed close to the entry, rifle in hand, listening to every noise. But nothing came. No patrols, no drones, just wind over sand. In the morning, the cubs awoke first. The larger one, more curious, stood on shaky legs and approached him. Kalen held still. It sniffed his boots, then sat back and tilted its head. "Not scared of me anymore, huh?" he said. It blinked slowly, then crept closer. Its fur was soft, thick with undergrowth, not yet hardened into armor like its mother's. Kalen reached out, and to his surprise, it didn't flinch. His fingers brushed its head. The cub leaned into the contact. He chuckled, quiet, rough-edged. "You've got no idea what kind of world you were born into." The other cub was slower to rise. The sickly one, thinner now, ribs more prominent. Kalen frowned. It hadn't eaten. He dug into his supplies, crushed part of a protein bar into smaller bits, and set them out. The larger cub ate immediately. The smaller sniffed the food, then turned away. "No appetite," Kalen muttered. "That's not good." He looked at the mother, still watching him, still too weak to stand. Her eyes met his. There was intelligence there, not just animal instinct. She understood what he was doing. More than that, she trusted him, or at least tolerated him enough to let him stay. He found an old drone buried near the storage racks. Fried circuits, cracked optics, but the solar panel was intact. With some rewiring and patience, he repurposed it into a makeshift charger. It wasn't elegant, but it gave him just enough power to bring his compad online. No new transmissions. He considered broadcasting. Just a signal ping. Someone might respond. But someone would respond, and the wrong someone could doom them all. Instead, he turned the pad scanner toward the outer perimeter. Nothing. For now. As the sun climbed, he watched the cubs play in the dust, brief, clumsy bursts of movement. The smaller one lay nearby, too weak to join. Kalen approached slowly, knelt, and placed a gloved hand on its flank. Shallow breathing. "Fever. Still not eating," he said, more to himself than anyone else. He needed to cool the fever, but his coolant packs were gone. He scanned the structure. The Jathari used organic tech, coolant sacs, bioreactive gel. There, a ruptured wall vent, seeping a faint blue mist. Dangerous if inhaled directly, but in small amounts. He broke off a shard of synthetic plating and scooped up a layer of the cool gel, then returned and placed it beneath the cub's body. It squirmed briefly, then settled. "You'll be all right," he whispered. "Just need time." That night, he dreamed of the war, of Jathari leaping from shadows, their war beasts howling. He remembered the scream of Private Nels as something with fangs dragged him into a crater. He remembered how they'd killed those things. With fire, grenades, chemical rounds. He woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The cubs were curled against their mother again. Safe, breathing. He didn't know what to feel. The days blurred. Kalen scavenged and tended wounds. Fed the cubs. Cleaned what little gear he had. Every action served the same contradiction. Keep them alive. The war was over. These creatures weren't enemies anymore. They were survivors. Just like him. But he knew better than to think peace would last. On the fourth day, he heard the engine. Faint. Low. Not human. Kalen ducked outside, crawling to the ridge. Through cracked binoculars, he saw it. A Jathari scout ship descending into the canyon. Not military colors. Salvage crew. Probably sent to erase evidence. Or recover tech. or eliminate loose ends. He hurried back inside. "We have to move," he said aloud. The words felt strange, as if spoken to a team. But his team was gone, and what remained was a wounded mother and two cubs barely able to walk. Still, the choice was clear. He packed what little gear he had, loaded rations into his satchel, and scanned the terrain. North, toward the old Terran outpost. It had water reclamation units, maybe enough shelter to hold them off. He approached the mother and touched her paw gently. "We leave at dusk." She didn't growl, didn't resist. Instead, with a groan that sounded like bones grinding together, she pushed herself upright. Her legs trembled. She didn't collapse. The cubs stirred and followed. Kalen stood beside her. Man and monster. Survivors. Both marked by a war that no longer cared about them. The sun dipped low behind the dunes, painting the ruined valley in fire and shadow. Together, they left the structure behind. The first step toward something neither of them understood. They moved through dusk and into darkness, a ragged procession against the dying light. Kalen led the way, rifle slung across his back, scanning the sands ahead for signs of drones or patrols. Behind him, the Varric mother lumbered forward, every step a battle against her healing body. The larger cub stayed close to her side, while the smaller one, still weak, clung to its sibling for warmth and balance. They didn't whimper, didn't cry. They simply endured. Kalen kept their pace slow. The outpost was roughly 20 kilometers north, a distance easily covered under normal conditions. But this terrain wasn't normal. Nothing about EOS 4 ever was. The wind carried static, and the ground shifted with unseen fractures. The ecosystem seemed to groan beneath their feet, like the planet itself was tired of war. Each mile pressed deeper into Kalen's mind. He kept thinking of the salvage crew, of what they'd do if they found a bunker first. The Jathari weren't known for mercy, not even toward their own creations. The Varric were engineered, living weapons, spawned in vat chambers, and bred to obey. But these three had been left behind, abandoned like broken tools. And the moment the salvagers found them, they'd be euthanized. Efficiently, quietly. Kalen's chest tightened as he walked. The stars emerged slowly overhead, their light dimmed by the ash in the upper atmosphere. He remembered a time when stars were beautiful. Not anymore. Now they only reminded him of the fleets that had rained fire down on cities, of the ones who watched from orbit, deciding who lived and who died. By midnight, the group reached the jagged ridgeline above the valley. Kalen stopped, crouched low, and held up a fist. The Vera halted behind him, as if understanding the signal. Below, nestled against the canyon wall, stood the remnants of Terran Outpost Theta 7. The exterior was scorched black, most of its perimeter defenses long since scavenged or buried in rock slides. But the structure remained mostly intact. Thick steel walls, partially collapsed hangars, and an access tunnel that led underground. Kalen whispered to himself, still standing. The descent was treacherous, and Kalen had to carry the smaller cub most of the way. It shivered in his arms, tiny ribs fluttering beneath soft fur. He could feel the fever in its body, pulsing heat through his armor. Inside the outpost, it was colder than expected. Dry, dusty, abandoned, but not forgotten. He activated his torch and swept the beam through the corridor. Signs of past fighting littered the floor. Spent casings, scorch marks, dried blood. But no bodies. They'd been removed long ago, along with anything of value. The mother Varric sniffed the air, then limped forward into the dark. Kalen found a supply room near the lower level, its door half sealed. He pried it open and stepped inside. The place was in shambles, but the generator room beyond still held a few solar cells, enough to power basic systems. He activated a light. Weak illumination flickered overhead. Home for now. The next several days passed in a tense rhythm. Kalen worked to secure the outpost while rationing his dwindling supplies. He sealed entrances, checked for active surveillance nodes, and scrubbed the internal comms array. The place hadn't transmitted in years. That was good. It meant no one knew they were here. The Varric recovered slowly. The mother's wound showed signs of real healing, and the larger cub had begun to hunt small scavenger lizards that nested in the ducts. The smaller one remained weak, but its fever finally broke, and it began to eat again. Not much, but enough. At night, Kalen sat outside the supply room and watched them. There was something oddly comforting about their presence. They didn't speak. They didn't ask questions. But they were there, alive, enduring. He found himself talking to them more often. I used to think you were all mindless. Just weapons. Just teeth and claws. Something to put down before it reached the gates. The mother's eyes met his. There was no accusation there. No anger. Just understanding. I didn't know, he admitted. I didn't care to. Each day, they survived felt like a theft. From fate. From the war machine. And each day made the idea of abandoning them harder to accept. But fate has a way of catching up. It happened while Kalen was checking the perimeter systems. A proximity alarm triggered by motion near the canyon's edge. At first, he thought it was a malfunction. But then came the signal. A soft, rhythmic pulse. Triangular waveform. Jatheri code. Kalen froze. He scrambled back into the outpost and sealed the outer hatch. Then he activated the internal cameras. Grainy visuals, but clear enough. A small scout team. 3 soldiers, cloaked in adaptive armor. Not fully armed. Recon. They were here. Not searching blindly. Tracking. He powered down the system and moved back toward the supply room. The Varric sensed it already. The mother stood tall, her muscles taut. The larger cub growled, low and uncertain. The small one whimpered. Kalen knelt before them. They found us. He didn't know what to say beyond that. No words made sense. No options looked clean. He couldn't fight them head on. Not with his gear this damaged. Not with 3 non-combatants at his side. But they could run. Not far, not fast, but maybe enough. South tunnel leads into the lower ravine. It's unstable, but it's a way out. The mother blinked slowly, then nudged her cubs toward the exit. She trusted him. Still, that trust burned in his chest. He should have left them, back when he had the chance. But he hadn't. And now he would see it through. He led them through the narrow corridor, flashlight bouncing against rusted walls. The air grew colder as they descended, the tunnel groaning under years of neglect. Behind them, faint echoes of movement, metal boots on stone. The enemy was close. Kalen turned a corner and nearly slipped into a collapsed shaft. The path ahead had caved, a dozen meters down into shadow. Damn it, he breathed. The only way forward now was across a narrow ledge, barely a foot wide. He turned to the mother. I'll carry the small one. You guide the big one. She growled softly in response. The crossing was agony. Slow, delicate, every footstep calculated. Dust rained from above as vibrations increased behind them. They were being followed. Kalen reached the other side, set the cub down, and turned to help the others. The larger cub jumped across with a burst of strength. The mother followed, but the edge cracked beneath her rear leg. She slipped. Kalen lunged, caught her paw. Her claws dug into his forearm as he gritted his teeth, straining with everything he had. You're not falling now. Not after all this. She growled, not in anger, but effort, and pushed up with her hind legs. Together, they scrambled to safety. Behind them, voices. Foreign. Inhuman. Kalen turned and fired a single shot into the ledge. The structure gave way, collapsing into the shaft in a cloud of dust and stone. The path was gone. They were safe. For now. They didn't stop until they reached a cavern beneath the ravine, hidden from above. The air was damp, thick with mineral vapors. Not ideal, but it was shelter. As the Varric settled beside their cubs, Kalen leaned against the wall and slid down to sit. His arm throbbed, probably dislocated. maybe fractured, but they'd made it. He looked at the three creatures he once would have called enemies, watched as the cubs curled into their mother's side, and she lowered her head in exhaustion. A family, abandoned by their creators. And he, a soldier left behind by his own. In the stillness, a thought crept into Kalen's mind, unwelcome but undeniable. He wasn't protecting them anymore. He was one of them. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of vigilance and whispered resolve. Deep in the caverns, far from the sun-scorched plains and the skeletal ruins of old outposts, Kalen began to carve a fragile existence. It was nothing like survival as a soldier. No orders, no check-ins, no purpose beyond breath and heartbeat. But it was something, and something was enough. He adapted quickly. The thermal vents beneath the cave walls released enough warmth to keep the young cubs from relapsing. Crystals in the rock ceiling absorbed and refracted ambient light, casting a soft glow that mimicked dawn and dusk. Kalen foraged each morning, mapping tunnels and setting tripwires with salvaged wiring. His every move was made with quiet precision, always aware that even one mistake could lead the Jotheri back to them. The Varric mother watched him constantly, not with suspicion anymore, but with an intensity that felt like understanding. She began to follow him on short foraging runs, teaching him to scent out the more nutritious fungal growths and to avoid the roots that released poisonous spores. The older cub, growing bolder by the day, started mimicking Kalen's movements, trotting after him with clumsy purpose. The smaller one remained close to the mother, but it too had grown stronger, its eyes brighter, its gait steadier. He found he could no longer separate himself from them in thought. The Varric weren't just companions now. They were his. Or maybe he was theirs. Still, the shadow of the Jotheri lingered. Kalen knew the recon team hadn't given up. They would report back. The species never abandoned targets of strategic interest. The Varric, defective or not, were living assets. Bioweapons encoded with neural firewalls and regenerative protocols, too valuable to leave in the wild. And now that he had intervened, the equation had shifted. He wasn't just a rogue human anymore. He was a variable, a threat. He would have to make a decision soon. Stay hidden and hope the galaxy forgot them, or take a stand before the choice was made for them. That choice came sooner than expected. It began with a tremor, gentle at first, then escalating into a violent quake that shook loose part of the ceiling. Kalen threw himself over the cubs, shielding them as debris rained down. The Varric mother snarled, eyes scanning the walls. When it ended, silence reclaimed the cave, but something felt wrong. A sound followed, not the grind of tectonic plates or the groan of shifting stone, but something mechanical, metallic footsteps echoing down the lower tunnels. Kalen's blood froze. He grabbed his rifle and sprinted toward the sound, rounding a curve in time to see a brief flash of motion. A spherical drone weaving through the darkness, its iris-like sensor glowing red. He fired. Sparks exploded as it crashed against the wall and shattered. Too late. The drone had already mapped the area, already transmitted. He sprinted back to the others. "We've been found." The mother didn't need an explanation. She herded the cubs forward, muscles taut, eyes wild with instinct. They had to move. Now, Kalen led them toward the outer passage, the same one they'd used to escape before, but it was no longer safe. The upper tunnels would be watched. Traps laid. Waiting. He needed a new plan. He opened the small handheld terminal he'd pulled from the outpost before they'd fled and accessed the archival data. One map showed an ancient mineral transport shaft leading out beneath the western cliffside, collapsed decades ago, but maybe still passable. "Come on," he said, half to himself. "You better still exist." The tunnel was worse than he imagined. Crushed girders, collapsed beams, pools of stagnant water that hissed at the edges. The air was thick with rot and iron. But it went deeper. They descended in silence, each step echoing like a warning. Halfway through, the passage narrowed, forcing them into single file. Kalen pressed forward, weapon raised. He didn't realize the moment they were being watched until it was already too late. An explosion tore through the rock behind them. Shrapnel shredded the walls. Kalen was thrown forward, slamming into a rusted pipe. His ears rang. Dust blinded him. Somewhere behind, the mother shrieked, a sound of fury and pain. He staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his brow. The Jathari strike team had arrived. Armored shadows poured through the smoke, rifles raised. Kalen opened fire, bullets tearing through the narrow space. One enemy dropped. Another returned fire. Sparks flew. The mother leapt past him, claws ripping into the attackers with savage force. She was a blur of teeth and fur, a living tempest. But there were too many. A bolt struck her side. She roared in defiance, even as her blood painted the stone. Kalen grabbed the cubs and pulled them into a side corridor. "We have to move." The older cub resisted, looking back, crying out. Kalen didn't hesitate. He scooped them both up, adrenaline lending strength he didn't know he had. Behind him, the sounds of battle waned. Then came silence. He didn't stop running. The escape shaft emerged into open air beneath the cliff face. Night had fallen. The sky was a blanket of stars, cold and uncaring. But they were out. Kalen collapsed to his knees, gasping, the cubs trembling in his arms. The mother hadn't followed. He turned toward the tunnel, heart hollow. She wasn't coming. For a moment, the void threatened to consume him. Guilt, rage, grief. But then movement. The mother limped into the moonlight, her side burned and bleeding, her breath ragged. She stumbled once, but remained standing. Kalen ran to her, caught her as she fell. "You did it," he whispered. "You brought them out." She licked his hand once, then closed her eyes. Still breathing. He worked through the night, binding her wounds, building a fire, using every shred of medical gear he had left. The cubs lay beside her, curled in tight. He didn't sleep. When morning broke, a transmission crackled on the terminal. Kalen stared at it, unmoving. It was a standard UHC ping, United Human Colonies. A supply vessel, sweeping the outer rim for survivors. Rare, but not impossible. He could respond. He could request extraction. But they'd ask questions. About his companions. About what he'd done. About the Varric. He looked down at them. Their fur matted with ash. Their bodies scarred by a war they never asked for. If he turned them over, they'd be studied. Caged. Dissected. Just tools again. He shut off the signal. Instead, he opened a new channel. Encrypted. Untraceable. "This is Kalen Voss, former UHC infantry. I am alive. I am not alone. If you're hearing this, know that there's more out here than orders and borders. There's life. Real life. And I'm done being a weapon." He paused. "I'm staying." He ended the transmission. For the first time in years, he felt weightless. The war hadn't ended, but he had found his peace. Not in a cause, not in command, but in the quiet bond between a soldier and the lives he refused to let die.